You're listening to Science Coast with Mallory Havens and
Chris White.
And our guest today is
Mark Swain.
Mark, can you tell us your role at the university?
So I am currently the interim dean of the College of Humanities, Fine Arts, and Communications. But this is the first semester that I haven't taught. I taught mostly painting and drawing for 25 years here at Lewis.
And you're a painter yourself, correct?
I have an MFA in painting from NIU, Northern Illinois University. So yes, that is correct.
I've seen some of your art. It's beautiful.
Yeah, full disclosure, I have two of Mark's paintings on the wall in my office.
Yes, thank you for that, Chris.
Yeah, no worries.
I've seen it in someone else's house that works at the university.
So I was on a bit of a hiatus quickly and recently did about 40 new paintings over the course of 2 solo shows over the past 3 years. So that's a lot of work. So I'm coming off producing a lot of paintings.
That's awesome. Today we're going to be talking about art and science. And I'm going to start with a little bit of a provocation from a publication or an online publication called The Conversation. And it says, "It's a stereotype, but many of us have made the assumption that scientists are a bit rigid and less artistic than others." I object to that. Artists, on the other hand, are often seen as being less rational than the rest of us, sometimes described as the left side of the brain versus the right side, or simply logical thinking versus artistic creativity. The two are often seen as polar opposites. So on today's show, we'd like to, have a conversation with one of our resident artists about whether or not science and art is really all that much different.
Yeah, I mean, I think my knee-jerk reaction to that is that they aren't. So I agree with that. I think that we have tendencies, and it comes out of our youth and the directions that we take intellectually as we grow intellectually. And, to be I'm assuming to be a scientist, you have to really care about science, and you have to care about humanity, and you have to care about the world, whatever discipline you're in.
Except for the evil mad scientists.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure all of that is true.
Well, I think you have to be motivated and inspired by it. Maybe that's
right.
Those are the words. And so for artists, if they're going to continue as artists and find a career in it, they have to be inspired. They have to be engaged and interested in what they do. So it's that intellectual curiosity that drives them, that makes them want to produce more and more work. And if they don't have that, then they should seek another discipline. They should seek another profession. So I think that maybe is a common denominator between the two. Intellectually, I think, and just speaking from myself as an artist, being inspired by artists of the past, being inspired by my world, like me, for example, I love the way light plays on surfaces. So I'm a seeing individual, so when I walk around, especially on sunny days, but it could even be overcast days, many of my last paintings were overcast, I can't help but be sort of distracted, and maybe that's where this sort of daydreaming artist comes from. But I'm often distracted by what I see, what comes through my eyes, and the interaction of color and how light determines or drives color. So that is something that just constantly interests me, and occasionally I have to take a moment and I have to go ahead and document it. I have to study it, and I study it through painting.
And don't you think that people are asking, how does the world work? Or let's interpret the world either through science and trying to break it down on a smaller level, or through art and trying to express it in a way that we can grasp it?
Absolutely. I think it's curiosity. I think those are both very human traits. We have these big brains, and we just can't stop being moved and affected by what comes in our ears and our eyes and our nose and everything else. And we think about it. We can't stop it. We can't stop thinking about it. So yes, it manifests itself differently. It manifests ourselves. Maybe you're inherently more creative than the next person. I don't know that I believe that. I think we're all born sort of equally, and we are often, our creativity is suppressed as a child. don't touch that, don't go there, don't wear that, don't listen to that music, don't do all this stuff. And then as we grow and we mature, we that creativity comes back out and can manifest itself in a variety of different ways. And in that intellectual journey, that helps shape us, whether we're going to go in one direction or another. And again, there could be some more innate, genetic or DNA that helps shape us and shapes that journey. But I think if I'm understanding right, Mallory, yes, it's just we just have this energy and we just want to think and we want to react and we want to do things, and some do it creatively and some do it another way. And that word creativity, I think, is also open to debate what that means. I mean, you certainly can be a creative scientist.
Right. Yep.
When I was listening to you talk about visual and using your eyes to see things, I was reminded of a line from the movie Oppenheimer this past summer, where the actor playing Oppenheimer as a young scientist was talking to a very prominent physicist who was looking at Oppenheimer as a prospective scientist, saying, do you see the physics? Do you see the science? Can you see it in your head, in your mind? So I do think, especially in my field in physics, there's a lot of connection between the visual, between the aesthetic of science, and it's often been true in my community that in order for people to really believe that a theory is true, it has to be perceived as being beautiful. Mm-hmm. And if the theory is not perceived as being beautiful, then how could an ugly theory be true? It can't be true. And it's very interesting because in my mind, that it's almost invoking art in just the language that the scientists are using as they think about and describe, their theories.
Yeah, I mean, I subscribe to that. A similar example that I used to always tell my classes, my students, is that, the average person wakes up and walks through the day and identifies everything, whether we do or not. But we say that's a door, that's the floor, the wall, that's Mallory, that's Chris. But even if we don't know what something is, we describe it. Oh, that thing over there that looks like that. And often what artists, visual learners, visual people do is that they begin to look at things for their aesthetic rather than a description of them or what they actually do.
Like, or the practicality.
The practicality, yeah. So like finding beauty in the mundane, and I know that's not exactly what you're saying there, Chris, but like this tangle of chords that's in front of me could be an inspiration for a design or a logo or something that is visual and deemed creative and interesting. So,
and I think it looks like an octopus.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and to sort of use the Oppenheimer example is to kind of like, can you visualize, the magnitude and the wholeness, even though we're not writing it on a board or we're not, solving equations right now, but we're looking at it in this kind of as an entity or as an existence, and can we understand the beauty of it? And I think that's something that a scientist certainly does, especially when they're looking at big things like that. But when an artist is sort of daydreaming or going through the design process, they're often regarding information in that way. They're not saying a chair. It's who is it, Magritte? This is not a pipe. This is not a hat.
Right.
It's actually a painting. It's an interpretation of those things. So there are many artists that have challenged that very idea and done it in a way like Magritte did. So I don't know that I'm answering your question, but it was an interesting one.
Oh, but we have a word that you brought up, inspire. And that's a word that scientists use all the time, inspiration and new ideas to try to solve problems. And scientists will refer to it as an inspiration. So another commonality, and you were just referring to how art is often the creation is an inspiration. An artist has an inspiration, and then is also triggered. I don't know if trigger is the right word for it, by something that they experience in the world. Same thing happens with scientists. Our best ideas often are not coming from a vacuum, but through interaction. Mm-hmm. And so this whole notion of interacting with the world is also in common.
also, like in publications now, they're asking for graphical abstracts, and they will ask certain articles to submit cover art. And I know as a scientist trying to create art that described my paper before, it was particularly difficult for me to understand how to convey those concepts well. And it took a group of us working together and refining it to make something that we thought was scientifically accurate, but also visually appealing and interesting looking. So I think really the two fields go together. If you're a scientific illustrator, you have that training in graphic design or art of some kind, and also in science, so that you can get the accuracy in there.
I mean, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say another area to think about is the intersections of math and science, and math
Fractals.
and art and patterns, right? So scientists are always looking for patterns, and patterns don't have to be the obvious ones. They can be very, fractal patterns, as Mallory, as you just said, very complex and subtle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about, even like a bird, how a bird makes a nest, and there are a variety of different bird nests, but they do it, they create sort of a feng shui, an environment that's comfortable for them, that gives them enough room to do what they have to do in their nest. And so when I think about that, it reminds me of kind of feng shui and design and building design and interior design. And so very much like it was back when I was teaching my photography class, digital photography, it's very logical and it's very scientific to compose a photograph, regardless of what it is, because you're settling into the photograph. You're in the same way that you would arrange your apartment in a comfortable and aesthetically pleasing way. So there's this kind of math that's involved, and whether you're using the rule of thirds or whatever you're doing, you're trying to create a dynamic and interesting image in photography, for example, but it could be drawing or painting or even sculpture. And you're doing it in an almost formulaic mathematical way. So in other words, you're not trying to create disharmony, you're trying to create harmony. You're trying to create a kind of a sense of balance. And you do that intuitively, or you do it through training, but you often do it. Now, a really good photographer who's had some training, their friends are going to say, boy, all of your photographs on Instagram are like really cool. I really like them. Well, there's a reason for that, that person is making those kinds of choices that's ultimately making their images more dynamic, more interactive, more engaging, more balanced, that create a sense of calm. So you certainly apply math and science to art making almost every time.
And I think there's also a connection, because you used the word harmony, so that made me instantly think about music. And there's so many scientists who are also musicians, and I'm an amateur musician. I'm not very good, but it really appeals to me. And I'm not exactly sure what it is about music, but it's incredibly meaningful to my brain. And it impacts me in ways that it triggers emotions in some sense, and passions in the same way that I get inspired by the science that I do.
Yeah, I mean, I use music all the time, and I am not a musician. I appreciate music very much, but just that. I always think about like recording artists going in and doing a recording and doing 200 takes of a song and layering it, or a big band or something. And I often think about engineering, like thinking about the combustion engine, but there's all kinds of engineering examples you could use, mechanical engineering. But like that kind of like that symphony of mechanics and the timing and the rhythm of a motor, for example, and what has to happen to get that output is very much like creating a piece of music, or it's very much like creating a body of art. And I'm sure it is a scientific thing, but it's very much like coming to a conclusion in a scientific experiment, that there has to be this collection of things that happen in order to get that resolution, or to get that output.
So it's very strategic. It's not just, we think of maybe science as being very strategic, like you have to follow experimental steps and make experimental plans, but art is also strategic, and especially when you're doing it professionally. I mean, we can all, I can go throw a clay pot or make a painting myself, but no one's going to buy it. So
I think that's interesting, Mallory, because I know that there are stereotypes out there that art, especially avant-garde art, is random. And that, this picture of the artist just flinging paint.
Like Jackson Pollock.
Just, and it's like, well, anybody could do that, right? And it's not true. It's just not true. There's so much more behind it that, people who aren't in it just don't even know about.
Yeah, it is so not true. And they don't know about it. I blame our K-12 education in the United States, but they just don't get as much experience or much interaction with art as they do with reading, writing, arithmetic, science, and everything else. And that's just our curriculum.
Yeah, and that's the first thing that gets cut with budget funding is the arts.
Yeah. Now I will say though that with the avant-garde artists is that they even those folks, even like take Picasso, who was a classically trained artist and then switched through Cubism into became Picasso. But often what those artists are doing is they're just rejecting convention, right? They're throwing it out. So they're still affected by the things we're talking about today, even though ultimately, unless they truly are like an outsider artist, totally untrained, coming from left field. Often they're like childlike artists that and so we embrace them because they are doing something that, again, we still can't do. And that is make art in the same way that a child does, which is almost impossible to do.
I turned my head for that cough, but we still caught it. Well, you have been listening to Science Coast. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Lewis University. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. The university name and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. This podcast was produced in the WLRA podcast studios at Lewis University. Visit lewisu.edu for more information about Lewis University. This is Mallory Havens.
And Chris White.
And
Mark Swain.
Thanks.
See you next time. Bye.